when you read rabbinical works, it's important to remember that they were writing as poets, and that as poets, they welcome interpretation. They want you to interpret the text. That's what poetry, I think, is coming out and engaging you, speaking to you, it's asking you something. And the rabbis, I think, are doing that. And I'm just, any great writing does this, right? Any great writing does this. Not that there's a lot of great writing, but the rabbis do engage you in this way, that you want to have a relationship with this thing that they've created, that is the liturgy. And we don't get bogged down by questions about, what does it really mean? Or is every perspective valid? What I'm trying to say is it invites our engagement with it. So let's do the same thing with Sukkot. It's different with Sukkot because with the rabbis, we were dealing with the liturgy. And here, I put together, this is kind of, I put together these, very often when I write short articles, I have one coming out tomorrow on the BDS resolution of Columbia, but more about that some other time. Whenever I write something short, and this is also, I think, good for writers, there's something you trust your flow. And even if you don't feel like you don't see yet the relationship between all the things that you're doing, you push forward, right? You go on. And sometimes, just especially for creative writing, sometimes you get to the end and you find out you anticipated the ending from the very beginning and hadn't really been aware of it. I don't know what that is, something magic about writing. I don't know. I'm not the only one who experiences this, I don't think. So I did this with these sources. And interestingly, I was going to start just with Midrashim, and I ended up somehow going back to the Psukim. And well, we have to remember Yavna, right? Yavna is the place in which the rabbis, well, they codified or canonized the holy writings. That's really when they turn, through creating a set of sacred texts, they essentially create the religion, right? I'm not saying there was no religion before then, but that rabbinic construct of saying these are the sacred texts. What happens at Yavna is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he leaves the Jerusalem, it's actually carried out in a coffin, and he refuses to die in the city with the zealots. He realizes that zealotry is going to end in death, which is interesting, right? He's carried out in a coffin as if he's dead. And it's kind of like his leaving also is this act of mourning. He goes to Yavna, and at Yavna, the sacrifice-centered religion becomes text-centered. And at Yavna, they determined which texts become sacred. Now, if you went to shul on Saturday, you know that before the Torah reading, I think, they read the book of of Kohelet, right? Of Ecclesiastes. Usually it's read on Shabbos Chol Hamoed, but we don't have one this year, so we read it on the first day. And the first part of the very first chapter talks about how some people wanted to bury it because it was too controversial and it shouldn't be included in the group of canonized texts. So that what happens at Yavna is this selection. Of course, the first 5 books of Moses have a special status for them. So here's the imperative in Leviticus. B'Sukkot teshu shivat yamim kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'Sukkot. Okay, so this is a verse out of context. I guess it's a command that you shall live in. If you found this like as an instruction manual for an alien culture, you'd be like, what's up with that? Why are they doing that? Why do we have these instructions? All citizens, kol ezrach Yisrael yeshu b'Sukkot. Okay. So it is, I mean, I went to sorry.
I feel like the lemon shaking would be a lot more confusing than the huts. Like the huts pale in comparison.
Well, I was going to say, I grew up I mean, interesting. I grew up in like a Reform background, So they don't really have Sukkot, right? Because they don't keep it, or they didn't. I don't know how the Reform movement has changed. I know it's changed, but at that time they never kept Sukkot. But there was like this museum piece sukkah outside, right, which nobody ever used or went into, and people would and Reform movement at that time really had a problem. They have changed since then. They were like basically saying, oh, that over there, that's part of our tradition, and in the meantime, they're inside. So for me, especially when I became from, like, the whole Sukkot thing was like crazy, right? What are you doing? Also, as Tikva said, right, the lemon, the thing, it is. I'll tell you also, I'm not going to talk in detail about the Arba Minim, but in the Midrash, it spends a very, very long time, the Midrash, talking about the Arba Minim. And it also says that King Solomon, he understood everything, but he did not understand the Arba Minim. And then the Gemara, the Medrash goes on and explains what he really did understand it, but that's still there, right? That there's something inscrutable about this holiday. And here's this is this the next verse? Yeah. So the next verse. So Laman Yedu Dorotechem Basukot Hoshavti et Bnei Yisrael Bahotzeti Otam Me'eretz Mitzrayim Ani Hashem Elokechem. I might revert to reading in Ashkenaz. I do it much better that way. I gave it up. I realized I have to speak like the kids do. So this is interesting. First of all, what's the relationship between these two verses?
The causality, whatever.
Right. It looks like
one after the other.
Right. Is that what we say? It is cause. It has to do with cause and something like that. But maybe we do a little bit better than that, or go a little further with it. What do you mean by causality? What do you mean?
First, we have the imperative, and then we are provided with the.
Oh, I see. Right. It's strange. It's almost like a tamei mitzvah that's built into the verse, right? You should do this, so this, right? And Chazal are generally averse to, whatever. They're often averse to this idea of giving the tam for the mitzvot, for giving a reason. Well, that's a whole. Pardon, go ahead.
They kind of propound the idea that inscrutability, that it's inexplicable. It's not for us to know.
Right, or that if we don't want to give one, that will be all defining because it accommodates more than one. That's what Rabbi Soloveitchik says.
It simplifies.
Right, right. Or it becomes utilitarian, right? I'm doing this. Why do you eat? Right. The classic example of this is for people who are really it's not that they don't understand Jewish law, they just don't understand Jewish culture. That we don't eat pork because it was very unhealthy, and now that it's healthy, we can eat it, right? That's a classic example. That's a great reason not to do tamei mitzvot, right? Oh, you see, the reason it was, we all know, is healthy. So now it's not healthy, we do away with it. It's a little bit like C was saying. Maybe not. So you shall live in booths, all citizens shall live in booths, in order that future generations, okay, so it's going forward, may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of Egypt. What is the aim of this whole enterprise?
Commemoration.
To experience liberation.
Right. Right. It's the experience of that. I mean, that's really a very apt, right? It's the experience about revelation of it's not. I would think more of as Pesach as that moment of revelation, and Sukkot is like now we experience it, or not revelation of Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? That's
I think
God makes Himself present fully in taking the Jews out of Egypt. And here, with the Sukkot, with the pasuk here, that future generations may know that I made the Israelites live in booths. Oh, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. By the Lord your
To me,
God.
it seems an experience of dependence,
Mm.
which we spoke about when we were talking about Yom Kippur.
Okay, let's just stay here for the moment. What do you guys think? What did you mean about Yom Kippur, Tikva? About the experience of dependence?
Part of the tefillah of Yom Kippur is this kind of announcement of dependence, of we are at your mercy, we are in your hand.
Right. Well, yeah,
And
I mean,
then
you just added a couple of metaphors there, but right. I mean, we at your mercy, I don't really see here. I mean, there's this knowledge that there is this knowledge of dependence, and I guess Yetziat Mitzrayim is the definitive.
Yetziat Mitzrayim, you completely, you leave with nothing but the matzah on your back. You're completely dependent on God for everything.
Good, right, and of course, every mitzvah is almost always related to Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? Yom Teruah, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Everything Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. So somehow that is the initial. I mean, I guess that is the formative. That's the formative moment of the Jewish people. That's when the Jewish people became Jews. Okay. So what are they supposed to know? That knowledge is going to do what? That's going to create the memory?
It's an experience, isn't it? It's a theater direction telling people to sit in a booth the way people sat in a booth thousands of years ago.
It's weird, right?
And you'll feel the same thing. Well, you'll remember and you'll be the same person.
Okay.
The thing I like about this discussion of Sukkot is it doesn't immediately reference where they're going to end up. We're not immediately thinking, okay, and then in a generation and a half they'll finally reach, the promised land. It's in essence that there's something of the Dayenu quality. If God had just taken us out and brought us to Sukkot, that would have been enough. There's an element of the Sukkah being a historical experience, but also kind of a state of perfection. Like it alone is significant. The Sukkah alone is significant.
Right. I mean, that just ties in with a lot of other things we'll see in a second. I mean, this is the one holiday of all the holidays which is called Chag. V'samachtem, right? I'm just trying to understand, following what Julie was saying, a little bit of what is the experience of the Sukkah? I made this joke on Twitter. I said the lecture was going to be called the Phenomenology of the Sukkah. And the only reason it was a joke is because I know people don't understand me, but I've been thinking about this for years and years and years. That's what the Sukkah does. It's this experience that the idea is not to just like run out to the Sukkah, eat something and come back in. I mean, you can't do everything in Sukkah. I mean, in Israel, it's much easier, but it is the most experiential holiday, I think. I mean, it's also interesting, and I'm not sure this might be related, that there is a relative paucity of midrashim on the Sukkah. Very, very little. And even on the whole holiday, there's just a little bit. There's no like Eicher or Kohelet. Tons of stuff on Pesach. But I was thinking, and this is just my sense maybe, is that the holiday itself it emphasizes the experiential so much that it allows that. I mean, that's what it wants. I found also, I was freaking out all last week. Just the news in America just freaks me out completely. It just seems very dangerous. And I'm glued to the Twitter feed, which is bad, and I'm usually not like that. And then when the holiday came, I really felt good going into the Sukkah. Really. I mean, I really felt that.
In these two verses, the temporal space is very interesting, and that idea you're bringing up, going into the Sukkah, you almost can stand outside time as an experience, and connected as that is with the creation of the Jewish people, which is itself connected to the creation of the world.
Mm.
I think it's very interesting, the idea it starts with 7 days, and then your role is to be in the middle in order to protect the past and protect the future. And so the experience is almost to stand outside time in this temporal space of creation.
Very cool. Very interesting. So it's yeah, go ahead.
That's similar to the midrash that I don't know if it's I don't think it's a midrash, but just an understanding that the sukkah is similar to the mikvah, that it's an entirely immersive experience that kind of back to well, the mikvah brings you back to a primordial state or a pre-sin state, and it's all about presence. There isn't a past and or a future at that moment.
That's very interesting.
And a lot of the halachot to do with sukkah, even what you just said about the kind of transcendence of the sukkah, even if it falls down, it essentially exists as the same sukkah when it's replaced. It exists in its own state, in its own sense of being, and we kind of managed to pull it together in some kind of replica of it, but it exists.
You sound like a Hasidic Rebbe. I was very inspired.
That reminds me.
I'm guessing that I'm just guessing that the metaphor that you used, I bet that's the womb is. I bet that's not Chazal. I bet that's Hasidah. I bet that's one of the Hasidic.
Of the mikvah and the sukkah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But that was lovely. Tikva, what were you saying?
I'm saying that okay, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Julia?
Julia? Okay, what Julia said reminded me of what I've forgotten her name. This is very embarrassing. The woman who wrote "If All the Seas Were Ink."
Ilana
Kirshen.
Ilana Kirshen. What Ilana Kirshen writes in If All the Seas Were Ink, she talks about an argument of whether you can have whether a sukkah that is inevitably going to fall down is kosher, and about how is your sukkah
never was. Was it ever?
Right,
because you guys are you're just getting a little bit too mystical for me. So can we go back to the text for a second?
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Say, I'm going to try not to be mystical. Hi. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm late. I don't really know what you're talking about.
We didn't really notice you coming in. You didn't make a lot of noise when you came in, so it's fine. You didn't disturb the class.
So I'm not quite sure what the question is, but I'm trying to get the gist of it.
Yeah.
I'll try not to be too mystical. I don't think I'm going to be mystical at all. Actually.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So my husband asked an interesting question on Friday night, and he asked why is it that on Pesach kids part of the narrative is that kids are going to ask questions so that we can tell the story, and how come on the Sukkot there's no concept of children asking questions? I mean, isn't it obvious that they're going to ask questions because we're sitting in the sukkah? And I think that's really the answer, that on Pesach we tell the story, and on Sukkot we live the story, and there's nothing to ask. There's really nothing to.
We said a version of that before. Very nice.
Okay.
Very. No. We talked about the different, and I think also that the in the pasuk tedu, that can also have to do with experience, right? Right. What is it? Or yedu, right? Right. And when I was good, let's just scroll down to here. Or if anybody was in shul on Saturday. Anybody remember what the Haftarah was? Does anybody pay attention to what the Haftarah is? It's Zechariah, which I don't really know well, but it's also if you pray, if you know the Jewish liturgy, the verse, on that day his name will be one, God will be one, name will be one, right? That we say at the end, that people say at the end of the Aleinu prayer. That's in Zechariah. So it's really like a very messianic oriented book, end of days book. And part of the end of days, as it's imagined in Zechariah, has to do with the nations of the world coming, the nations of the world who survived this terrible war, who now are coming to praise the one God. And they do that on the festival of Sukkot.
Mhm.
So it's definitely, there is this sense in, and this I think is also experiential, which I felt between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. You do have a feeling that you're getting to an ending, right? You've just been through these two things. We talked about time, past, present, and future all along. In the rabbinic calendar, Sukkot comes at the end of two different cycles, right? First, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and then also Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. I'm not saying anything mystical here. I'm just saying you have that experience. It feels like you've been through something. So I think that that sense of ending is kind of, you see it historically as Chazal imagined the Messianic future. You can see why it's associated also with the Sukkah, because there is that sense of what Julia said earlier. I would just say, I don't know, I mean, I guess we're trying to get to what is the experience of the Sukkah, or what from the verses, what do we understand it could be? Of course, it's interesting here because we're not only using the verses, as everybody's saying, we're actually going into the Sukkah, we're experiencing it.
Another end associated with Sukkot is Simchat Torah, when we finish reading the Torah too.
Right, okay, good, right, and okay. Right, I mean, Shmini Atzeret is also, it's a liminal day. Is it part of, is it part of Sukkot? No. Is it a separate thing? Shmini Atzeret, it's 8, it's 7 or 8. It's a weird thing, right?
There's also the agricultural aspect of
Yeah.
Sukkot.
Okay.
It's the holiday of the
Right, it's the holiday of the gathering, right,
gathering.
Right.
So like, so it's
the holiday of Shefa. It's the holiday of abundance. I mean, it's an abundance. We still read Kohelet on the Saturday on the Shabbat of Sukkot, right? If you're feeling too comfortable, remember, right? You know, vanity of vanities. I mean, that's so that you see also that in the creation of this liturgical experience, I think Chazal are really stage directors, meaning they understand the psukim in certain ways, here pretty straightforwardly. That's a directive. And then they tell you, well, then they tell you exactly what the mitzvah entails, what things you have to do. There's both, I think, the textual and the cognitive. You guys have all been saying that. Let's see this Breita. It's a Tannaitic source from the Gemara. It'll be Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Tanya ki besukot hoshvati et bnei Yisrael. How do we read this? Ki besukot hoshvati et bnei Yisrael anani kavod. Oh no! So how, just somebody read it. Somebody read it in proper Hebrew, please.
It's
כי בסוכות הושבתי את בני ישראל, ענני כבוד היו.
ענני כבוד היו. Okay. Oh, I see. So that's the first part is just the pasuk, which we just read. That's the pasuk, and then there's a machloket between the two Tanaim. First, Rabbi Eliezer speaks, and then Rabbi Akiva, he disagrees with them. So Ananei kavod hayu. That's already, I guess, there's already an implicit question. What does this mean? What does it mean to say, and I will? I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths. What are the? I mean, what's the question that's being answered?
So Rabbi Eliezer is saying that it was clouds, or I don't know, and Rabbi Akiva is saying that it was actual, literally Sukkot.
They were actual clouds of glory, and Rabbi Akiva says Sukkot mamash, asu lahem. Oh, so God actually makes these things. Really? Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the Sukkot that God makes are clouds of glory. It's more of a metaphor.
Wait. So wait. What's it? One second, Alana. You're just going too fast. First, we're trying to figure out what actually is. what their difference is. One seems to be a metaphor, right?
Yeah, that thought that God made for Israel were clouds of glory. He's not talking
okay.
about
So I want to
he's
understand what underlies these differing approaches.
And Rabbi Akiva says they're actual Sukkot made from wood and
right. I
and
mean, the
leaves
first read of it is Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Eliezer, "Come on," and they're not. Let's be practical.
Well,
Right? They weren't clouds of glory. They were huts. What's that?
Right. Rabbi Akiva even implies that Bnei Israel were the ones who built the Sukkot.
Right. They made them for themselves. Right.
Right. Asulahem,
No,
not
but
Asalahem.
But it could be ambiguous because Asulem, you know,
No, כמובן שכן. No, it's meant to be ambiguous, obviously. But I'm saying there are two ways to interpret it. You can say God made the Sukkah,
right.
Or
okay.
they
We're distinguishing now between the, great. So we're distinguishing now between. Wait, Tego, so can you guys not hear me? Hello.
We hear you.
Yeah, you did. Tego, you showed a lot. You showed a tremendous amount of stamina on that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're just trying to distinguish between these two approaches. So Rabbi Akiva says they were real and they made them for themselves, and Rabbi Eliezer says that they were clouds of glory. Okay, I guess the question is, when we sit in the sukkah, what are we remembering? Are we remembering the real Sukkot that they made for themselves in the desert? Or are we remembering the magical clouds of glory that one time that happened?
Isn't the effect of the juxtaposition to set up a false dichotomy, and that you're supposed to read them side by side and that they are both things simultaneously?
Okay, right. And well, so a very quick digression in one of my favorite topics, very quick, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, which is this idea that in rabbinic dispute, they're both considered to be true. Now you can imagine how this phrase, these and these are the words of the living God, have been appropriated by multiple different groups who have multiple different ideas of pluralism. I'll tell you how it works for the rabbis. It means, and how it relates here, is of course Ed is right. I mean, we could just stop there. Of course Ed is right. But the fact that we don't say either one of them is right doesn't mean we don't say they're both right. They're both right, meaning we don't compromise between them. I know Ed wasn't suggesting that, but the rabbis, these and these are the words of the living God. You know, it's strange because they say in yeshiva that you don't have a machloket about mitziut, right? You never have a dispute about, was it 10 inches or 12 inches, right? Whatever, there's a reason, a predisposition against that. Don't do that. Seems to be this here. What actually happened?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to view it. One becomes more true to your to the story you want to tell. I just looked up.
Rashi
follows that it's ananei kavod, for example.
Doesn't he say something in Rabbi Akiva? But he says something in Rabbi Akiva also. Rashi
thought that Rashi thought that Rabbi Eliezer was that was the way to go. I don't think he would have said that it's incorrect.
No, he's saying that's, yeah, he's saying that's pshat. That's what Rashi is saying, that Rabbi Eliezer, that's what the text means. That's what it means. Interesting, right? I don't know. I don't know. Is this? I just thought I saw this mentioned in a responsa by Rav Asher Weiss, which doesn't make any sense. Well, how could this be poskened? Isn't this just for your imagination?
I don't know why it's necessary.
I don't think it is necessary either, and I'm surprised that I'm remembering that I think it was poskened. Like what? So, Julia's saying nobody's going to tell me how to remember it. But we could imagine, if we're putting this tradition together, well, we want to guide their memories. And after all, we're, good readers of the text, and they're going to remember us for a very long time. I don't know. I
Have some kind of
yeah,
meaning.
go ahead.
Does Sukkah have another meaning that I'm forgetting? Like we use the term, and yet we don't take it apart and ask what its shoresh is, or what similar words are, what words are similar to Sukkah. Like what is the etymology of the word?
Sukkah is to l'schach. It's like a l'sochich. It's to roof something.
So the shoresh is
To protect.
To provide shelter, maybe.
That's a good one. Shelter.
It's a good question.
So thank you. But tell me about what is the, forget the question of what we're supposed to do, but what is the difference in their worldview? That's what I want to know.
One is the top down, and one is from the bottom up.
So say more about that, see.
I think you are much more qualified.
I think I am also, but that may not be the primary variable here.
It certainly benefits God's narrative that it's top down, right?
From God's point of view, God wants it to be His way. But we know already. The rabbis. They don't take this the wrong way, and I don't mean it the wrong way. The rabbis create God, and I don't mean that in a 20th century sense. The rabbis make up God. I don't mean that. But so yeah, I don't know. I mean, so the first one is from the
story of God.
So the first one is
this is about us our descendants.
Well, I mean, I would say two different. I would see differently. That the clouds of glory, they're anekavod hayu, and it's this. It's as you're saying, it's this divine intervention. It's also a one-time divine intervention, I think, right? On Sukkot, we remember. Well, we remembered when that happened. I guess in both, maybe it's a one-time thing. So you remember that moment of this divine intervention into history. And that's what we want, and that's what the pasuk wants you to remember. There's a big distinction here. The pasuk wants you to remember that God took you out, that He was the agent there.
Right. But it also could.
And let's say the next one while it's still fresh.
Can I build on what you said, please?
Let's just get to the next little piece. Rabbi Akiva Omer Sukkot mamash asu lahem. So that perspective seems, as Cis just said, is from the bottom up. And the bottom up also, doesn't it imply we did this ourselves, and there's much more of a sense of, according to Rabbi Akiva, I feel much more the sense of continuity with what came before me. Meaning they made Sukkot, and I'm doing the same thing. And the Sukkot themselves are a commemoration of those Sukkot and somehow continuous with it. So I'm kind of taking a little further what you were saying about it being very people-centered. And you feel the continuity of tradition and time. With the clouds of glory, aren't you just remembering? I like Rabbi Akiva so much, and I think Julia said that Rashi prefers Rabbi Eliezer. I mean, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it looks to me much more like Pesach. This magical thing happened. I mean, whatever, not the supernatural thing happened. The transcendent intervened into the world and changed it. That's how I think of Passover. But maybe that's, I mean,
well,
so maybe you have to work with that homiletically and see the continuity between this and Pesach. I guess that's maybe Rabbi Eliezer is saying that.
To me, it seems like it's a question of who is an agent in this story of redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the story of the clouds of glory, it is God redeems us. We are the redeemed. We are passive. And if we build the Sukkot, then we are the agents in our own redemption. And so it makes sense that Rashi was living in this.
Yeah, I hear. I mean, in both of them, it is for I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths. And they're both asking, well, why did God do this? God's agency is still there. It's not erased in the last one. I mean, Rabbi Akiva is not saying, we did it on our own. But there is, and this is why I prefer Rabbi Akiva, there seems to be a kind of tension between the two of them.
All right, well, the question is, do we help God, and are we God's agents in our own redemption?
No, I hear that very much. And that seems like, and the rabbis, as I was saying before, in relationship to the creation of God, they take a very active view in creating Judaism as an experience.
I'll ask a quick question.
Yes, please.
About whether this in some way relates to how you read the entire book of Leviticus, because it seems to be quite an important axiomatic difference on how you approach the law in terms of the whole book.
I would probably not be able to answer about the whole book. Well, what is your assumption about what the choices are?
My basically, knowing very little, my assumption is that to emphasize the spiritual or to emphasize the letter of the law, in that Rabbi Akiva makes it actual. I mean,
right.
So if you read Leviticus as if you take the first example, you'd be more free to be spiritual and not observe the letter of the law.
Yeah, you have to do a lot of research into Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva and see where they're coming from. But I think, let's go back to what Alana said before, that for one, it is a metaphor. It's a sign, right? What's the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva on the holiday? I sit in the sukkah and I think, oh, this is the kind of sukkah my ancestors made. According to Rabbi Eliezer, I sit in the sukkah and I think, wow, this schach over my head, as insignificant as it is, are like the ananei kavod, and just like, and I feel that sense of, I'm going with it, and I feel that sense of divine presence. I feel that sense of divine protection. I mean, there in Rabbi, I gave Rabbi Eliezer short shrift because there he's really emphasizing, I think, the dialectic of the experience, which is you're in this very frail building. Who are you kidding that you think it's going to stand up? And yet you feel the ananei kavod. So you see why Rabbi Eliezer is very, very good. Rabbi Akiva, he maintains the tension between the divine and the man-made. But Rabbi Eliezer really focuses on this in the sukkah and emphasizes that, if you leave the sukkah after 7 days and you haven't been changed because of the experience of the divine, well, you weren't doing what you're supposed to do. Yeah, and I don't think Rabbi Akiva is he's not a proto-Karaite or anything like that. I mean, I can see why you would say that here. I think Rabbi Akiva is just more, I would say just much more practical. I don't even know. I don't know enough about Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we have time to read one midrash. So yeah.
Are also really kind of confused about the idea of a sukkah. Some later commentaries say, it's an odd time to have a sukkah. They don't really need shade.
Right.
So we have to kind of rethink the idea of sukkah right now in the seasonal calendar because ain't tzorach. So it's brought up several other ones. That's part of the crux of this question is, could it really be a sukkah? Really, why? For what? How? Why would this be a practical sukkah? So then they go into like the nature of the ananei kavod in order to describe why was it again.
Right. I mean, one of the commentators says, your kids may learn this in day school, is that we go out and bring the sukkah outside at a time when everybody else is coming inside. Right? They lived in Europe, most of these people who are writing this, right?
Yeah.
So the sense is that it is definitely a signifying thing. right? Don't think it's not a signifying thing. It is a signifying thing. Okay, I want to do one midrash.
I have
yeah.
a short question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You also refer to Sukkot because people are making pilgrimages to the temple at this time.
Right.
And it took 2 or 3 days to get there. So are they building temporary things on the way? Are they camping out when they get there?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Let's try to read some of this. Let's see. All right, let's just read a little bit of it. So here, and in this remaining time, let's read this midrash, and we'll try to, as I said to you before, there's a lot of midrashim in V'yikra Rabbah. There's like a whole chapter on it, but primarily on v'lakachtem, right? And you lakachtem lachem, is that what it is? And you take for yourselves. So Chazal are lakachtem lachem b'yom harishon. You took them for yourself, and we need to know what exactly that means, that you took them for yourself. Because it lends that this lachem is sticking out and saying, I need to be interpreted. As I said to you, also, the Midrash represents Solomon, the wisest of all people, saying, I don't know what this means. So there is something really perplexing about this whole thing. So let's read a little bit, and we'll pause. Another interpretation, I'm going to read it in English, it's just easier for me. Another interpretation of, and you shall take for yourselves, this is the understanding that which is written, this is another pasuk, and that's how Midrash works, right? Midrash takes one verse, and we're now going to understand it in the context of the other verse, right? You can understand why in the 80s, literary critics wrote books about Midrash and talked about intertextuality, right? I grew very tired of that word intertextuality when I was in graduate school, but it kind of makes a little bit of sense here. That is, you look through one text in order to understand another text. And this other text is, he has turned to the prayer of the destitute and has not spurned their prayer. What does that have to do with what we were just reading? For Israel was victorious in the trial and their iniquities were forgiven. And I guess that's an interpretation. For Israel was victorious in their trial and their iniquities were forgiven. And the angels say, Israel has been victorious. As it is stated, moreover, the victory of Israel does not deceive or change his mind. Let's just read that first part again in Hebrew, okay?
Yeah.
If you read it in English, it's like reading it in a foreign language.
Because it's about the construction of lakachtem lachem, and if you don't understand how that is a strange conjugation, you're not going to understand the English.
Right. No. Right. And in addition, in English, it just the translation, this is just sloppy, but it's inevitably like very highfalutin or whatever. You know, it's not. They're not poets who are translating it, which is very often when I need to quote from the Hebrew scriptures, I quote from the King James Bible, which is pretty sad. But the King James Bible is great.
You don't have a JPS?
No, whatever. I'm sure it's online. Okay, so this is in the other verse. Pana el tfilat ha'arar. So God turns to the tefillah of the arar, which is the destitute. Velo baza et tfilatam, and he doesn't cast away. He doesn't discourage their prayers. Shenitzachu Yisrael bedin, v'nimchalu avanotenu v'hein omri natzchu Yisrael shenemar v'gam netzach Yisrael lo yishaker v'lo yinachem hu shedavid omer l'Yisrael im kayamtim mitzvahs lulav shenikar naim shenemar. It keeps on going on and on here. So what is the meaning of lakachtem lachem? So
they are making association. They are associated.
Yeah. So that's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, young minds. What is the association here? How do we get from here to how do we get from here to here to Netzach Yisrael?
To nitzchu, that they won,
Okay,
not
right.
that they were
Yeah,
eternal.
no, I understand, right? No, I just meant why
No,
are
but
we
how
talking
did
about
you
the
get? How
concept?
did you get from the first? Where did you get from the verse to the Tfilat
Well,
Hara?
maybe
No, so
Chad
that the
Sofa
way it's
Pasul.
the way it's presented is I'm going to well, if you want to understand this previous verse, you have to understand it through this verse.
I don't see that.
Okay, the intertextuality. Yeah. Okay.
Right. It's weirder than intertextuality because it's giving you the lens and saying this is the correct. I think this is the one thing that gets lost in Midrash is we forget that this verse, which generates everything that comes after it, is a creative choice, right? That is, and we talked about the poetry of quotation last time. They choose the verse, as somebody said last time, of the thousands, tens of thousands of verses, they chose this one, right? And we have the tendency when we read Mishnah, oh, that's just obvious, right? No, Chazal telling you this is how you should look at it. Everything about what Chazal do is they are very, very strong interpreters, right? I was reading Eicha, and most of the time they're saying, oh, it couldn't mean this, it means this, right? It can't mean what Solomon seems to be saying, right? Which is you shouldn't waste your time with anything, and why not Torah also, right? Everything is vain, right? And the rabbis find a way to turn it upside down. And it's not that they're being dishonest. They're not being dishonest. They're saying if you look at it from this lens, and their whole way of being or their whole campaign is against literalism. Don't read things literally. You can't read anything literally. And so I'm just saying that it's not like they're hiding it or they're embarrassed about it. It's just part of the way in which a sacred text is accommodated into a tradition. And that sacred text will have in it sometimes things that seem heretical. And you live with it. And the simple reading of the Midrash assures people who are Katane Rosh, right? Oh yeah, it's fine. There's no problem in Ecclesiastes. You can't read the text and not see the problem. And Chazal do not think that they're erasing the pshat by giving their drush. They never do. Right? Rashi says one of his principles of interpretation is you never take the verse out of its original meaning unless you really have to. Right? The Chazal, they operate under that principle. So they're not, I mean, you know, I hesitate to invoke the kind of classical philosopher Leo Strauss because I really don't like the readings he produces. They just seem to lack any heart. But he does say, and I think this is a principle, he has this essay called Censorship and the Persecution in the Art of Writing. And the assumption is that no writer can write what he really wants to, or what she really wants to, ever. You know, the extreme case would be the Virgil's Aeneid, right? Virgil is writing for Augustus. He wants to write a great work, but he also can't displease the Emperor Augustus. So he has to write the poem the way he writes it. He can't write a poem. I mean, my reading of the poem is it's really an anti-war poem. When of course everybody at every university in America will say, oh, you see, you know, Virgil is arguing for this patriarchal, patriarchal colonialism. And it seems to be the exact opposite. Because if you read the poem carefully, because you know Virgil could not have written another poem. He had to write a poem that looked like he was celebrating Augustus. And he does. But if you read it, but Augustus didn't go to graduate school, right? And he's a dumb reader. Most people are dumb readers. And that's what the Midrash is doing also. And I don't think it's because there's a fear of persecution, it's people can't handle the truth. So you tell these stories in a way in which there is the meaning that gets you by, right? Oh, that's why it's there, right? the meaning that gets a community by, and then there's the meaning that you understand. And it's not that Chazal are heretics. Don't misunderstand me. It is that Chazal have a conception of belief that most people can't live with. Most people can't live with belief and skepticism at the same time. So they say, oh, go, it's fine. And that satisfies people. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's ever been different. I mean, that's kind of what you get from Plato's cave, that it's really never been different. That people, I hate to say the stupid philosophical cliche, but people prefer the shadows. Even people who say they don't prefer the shadows even people who have a sign up that's saying, I don't prefer the shadows, I'm enlightened. Even those people are in the shadows. That was the bad thing about enlightenment, is that everybody thinks they're enlightened when being enlightened is hard. Yeah, so Midrash it's structured in that way, I think, as well, that it builds in this ambiguity. Just before we go, because I know it's late, let's just see what would be a nice thing for us to end with. Let's go back here. Oh, this part, right. Let's do the end.
Can I ask a question? Because I really don't think I understood the text.
What?
I really don't think I understood the text, so I wanted to ask a question about it, the one you just read.
Okay.
Is it talking about solidarity, that Israel is victorious when it has solidarity between poor people and the rest of the population? Is that what it means when it says tfilat ar lo baza et tfilatam?
Right. Well, thank you for bringing us back here. I think it brings into contrast the dialectic that we saw before between, feeling absolute despair and also Netzach Yisrael, right? This eternity. So God turns to the tefillah of the one who is really forsaken, because, we see this is going to tie up with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Bedin v'nimchalu avanotehem. And I guess, and we say, somebody says, we were forgiven for our sins and we have triumphed. And then we bring another verse, V'gam netzach Yisrael lo yishakar lo yinachem. Oh, and now God is being called Netzach Yisrael, and he never lies or never sleeps. That that God, as this personified Netzach, is always present, always moving into the future. Yeah, Alana, what were you going to say?
Okay, so maybe I'm reading it wrong, because it's panad, it's God shelo baza. But I was thinking that what it meant was that it was because Israel was united. It was because we all prayed together for the weakest. And
I mean, that's very nice. Where do you see that, though? Where do you see that?
Victorious, because I didn't read panah correctly. I think panah is Elohim, but I was thinking panah was Israel.
No, nice. No, I don't think so. Yeah.
And obviously the nitzchu becomes a play on the word and then becomes netzach. That's exactly what happens. But I think that I felt that the reason that Israel is victorious and the reason that the prayers are being answered is because of the unity.
I mean, I like it, but I don't see it. But okay, let's. And I'm also not being successful in putting the verses together. I can't really follow it all. But let's read them. So then it says Shenemar ni'imot b'yaminecho netzach. What does that mean in English? B'ni'imot.
Pleasantness.
Okay, and the pleasantness of where is that? Where am I? I'm sorry. Where are we here?
You have to go down to find the English. English is under it.
Oh, here? No.
You're going too far.
You guys see it? Oh, here it is. Okay. Hari ata mevusernitz shenitzachta leumot ha'olam. You've triumphed over the nations of the world. Shenemar gam netzach Yisrael. Another verse. Lefikach Moshe mazil Yisrael va'omer lahem ulakachtem lachem. For this reason, God said to you, and you should take them. How does this relate at all to Sukkot?
It's just a question about that strange lakachtem lachem and not lakachtem otam or something. It's just a strange use of the second word.
No, I understand that, but what does this have to do with Sukkot? This drush that we get here.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't see the connection.
There a line in the Bible about the Sukkot, velakachtem lachem?
No. So that's the verse that we're trying to understand, and now we're trying to understand without fully understanding the logic of the psukim. We're trying to understand how this is related to the first reading, lakachtem lachem. Oh, I'm going to explain it. What has been explained here? Why does it follow that I would say then Moshe says lakachtem lachem? So I would suggest that there's this idea that Netzach Yisrael is associated, I think, in the minds of Chazal with Sukkot. As we'll see. That's part of what I was saying before about what Ed was saying in relationship to two perspectives being right. And this is also the way Midrash is, I think, mistaught, is you don't look at one and say, oh, here's one interpretation, here's another, and they're mutually exclusive. They're all related to one another, right? Even though it says davar acher. The davar acher isn't davar acher, I'm going to replace what came before, is davar acher, here's more, right? This is totally consistent with what we've been saying now for a long time about literary texts in general. So that's why I just want to go on here. Amar Rabbi Avin panel tefillah ta'arar. God turned to the tefillah of the destitute. Amar Rabbi Avin ein anu yicholin lamod al apo shel David. We can't know the we can't know the
Lie.
I think we can know who he was. Sometimes he called himself a poor person. Right? He had good days and bad days. How did that happen? This is cool also, right? So he had good days and he had bad days. What were his good days? When he thought of himself as a king. It's when he saw all the future generations and he saw all the tzaddikim that came out of him in the future. What were his bad days? Well, the exact opposite. When he saw the Rishayim, should sofer Rishayim, Yotzim Mimenu, Achaz, Menashe, Amon, Hayukaratmo Ani, Tefillah Ani Ki Anaf. So we get through all of that here and say what? What was our question? I mean, we wanted to know what he meant by, I guess David prayed when he was an ani. This is when he prayed. I have no idea. How is this an answer to the question? And it gets even more complicated. Shenemar, tefilat la'ani ki yatov. What does that mean? Literally, somebody help me? Julia?
When the poor man, when a poor man wraps himself in prayer.
Tefillah Ani Ki Yatov, very nice. Rabbi Alexandria Potter Kriya, he understands this verse, Bapoel Hazeh, with a worker. Ma poel hazeh yoshev u'mishamer. What is just like a worker who sits and takes account of all of the work that he does, likishapalig malachto, kima uliakshena besof. Right? So David is being compared now to a worker, and he's a poor guy. And whenever he takes time off, I guess he's very scrupulous as well, he writes down the time that he misses so that he can finish it at the end. Okay. What does that have to do with David?
What does that have to do with the lulav?
So let's continue. V'haya tufim lelavan, and then we now another pasuk. We're bringing from Bereshit now, like to just define what this word atuf means. Let's keep on going to get some to lulav and estrog. So this is, I guess, this is a long set of drashot on the last part of the verse that you should not send them off in disgrace or whatever it was literally. Here we go. Where is the davar acher? Davar acher tichtav zo l'dor achron. Or maybe that's the verse that's being understood. Elu doros halalo shehem netuyan lemita. Va'am nivra yaluya shakadosh baruch hu ati livrot otan bria chadasha. Amal leinu lasot. Likach lulav etrog v'nekalas hakadosh baruch hu lefikach Moshe masir et Yisrael v'omer lahem lekachtem lachem b'yom harishon. What? I mean, it's very beautiful, but can anybody just give us a little run at explaining this last part? What are the dorot? That's from another verse.
Well, you skipped that part.
Yeah, I skipped that part. I know. I just wanted to know what we're. Okay. Well, I don't know what they are. So, but what is
based on what they just in school?
Pardon?
We can infer the meaning of this based on how they teach kids.
Okay.
What the meaning is of all of bringing together the four species. There's the four species are taught to represent elements of our being or of the body of the Jewish people or our senses or something. What it could mean is that we're bringing elements that are disparate, sometimes good, sometimes evil, and we're pulling them together.
Right. No, you say a lot of what the Gemara says, or the Medrash says. Right. Also, I'm just thinking. Also, they also say the Avot, right, which is another kind of unity, right? But you're already in drush, right? I hear.
Well, this is drush. So.
Right. No, it's all drush, but you're already on a very high level. I just want to try to understand the words. They're all going to die. Nivra yaluya. One more is my kids want me to eat, so this is finished. Nivra yaluya, and the created nation will praise him. In the end, God is going to make you into a new bria. The whole previous thing was about God turning you into a new bria at different times, or people who are about to die, Mordechai. New bria. So likach lulav etrog nekalas means to praise God. Lefikach Moshe mazir et Yisrael v'omer lekachtem lechem b'yom harishon. Why is this? Why we're about to die, and there's this idea of the dor achron. And you're telling them in the last generation, it turns out the last generation is not one particular generation. Every generation thinks it's the last generation. Mordechai did, Cheskia did, they all thought it. And it wasn't the last generation. So maybe we're also like that. We're the last generation. We feel the sense of we're enough, right? Right? And we're going to create ourselves anew. And how are we going to do this? I guess what Julia said, right? And then we have all this emphasis on unity. Esra, right, likach lulav etra. Sometimes it just says lulav, so here it's both of them. It doesn't say the willow and the hadas, but it says both of them here. Unikalis, lekadosh baruch hu, lefikach, Moshe mazir et Yisrael, v'omer lahem lekachtem, b'yom harishon. Right, I think also, there's a midrash that goes later, and it says, how do we know who won? There's a war between the nations in the world and the Jewish people. It's a mashal, but the end is the Jewish people, or the person comes out waving his yellow stick, which shows that he was victorious. And that mashal there is meant to be, it explicitly links Sukkot with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It says Rosh Hashanah, there was the beginning of forgiveness, Yom Kippur, it was further on, and then there's this idea of the 4 days that you, right after Yom Kippur, the halach is start to build the sukkah, right? My kids always want to build the whole thing. I'd like bring up a piece of wood, right? It just is simon, right? I'm going from mitzvah to mitzvah. So there's this period, you go from one, that's why the holidays are so close, it works out, or liturgically or experientially. You're involved in the mitzvah of sukkah, and then you go into the sukkah, and then you get to wave this flag in victory. So there is this sense of this kind of, as I said before, in Zechariah, there's this messianic sense of sukkah, experientially, there's this sense where we've come to the end of the 3 regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. We've come from more immediately from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur to Sukkot. And this we're going back to before, this feeling, this experiential feeling of renewal, I guess, right? But it's also interesting for Chazal, it's this renewal which is tied, we don't forget about death, right? Livrot otan bria chadasha, but elu doros halal shem nituyim lamita. I mean, I guess, but that's everybody. Yet nonetheless, I'm going fast now, I know, but nonetheless, there is the sense, even though there's frailty and schach and the ease of it falling. I mean, the Sukkot David HaNofelet is Jewish history, right? Fallen Sukkah, right? So that feeling, and even though we live in the state of Israel today, thank God, there still is that frailty. And I think we feel it more now than ever, right? It's because it's an existential frailty. And that existential frailty, I imagine, is meant to go away with, in the end of days. But we have that existential frailty still. And it accommodates, nonetheless, it accommodates Netzach. I keep on saying Netzach Yisrael because there's a book by the Maharal of Prague who really goes off on this. The book is called Netzach Yisrael. And he has a very, it's not only on Sukkot, but he has a very interesting part about Sukkot. Why Sukkot is kind of a pivotal moment or a pivotal point to understand what Jewish redemption is. The Jewish redemption it's always coming from this sense of apparent death, but continued resilience.
What's the book?
Pardon?
What's the book?
Netzach Yisrael.
Okay.
I'm also what you're saying also.
It was the last comment. My kids are, I'm coming. Yeah.
Oh, I don't have to make it at all. It's fine.
Well, thank you guys. They made food, and I have to go be a good person and sit in the sukkah. Okay, see you. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Super fun.
Bye.
Professor?